We're talking with Dr. Michael Waller, who was in the early 90s warning Russia that just because the wall fell in Berlin, and just because the statues were toppled, and just because the communist government was disappearing, that the KGB, the intelligence apparatus in Russia, was actually poised to take over. And we've seen that happen with Vladimir Putin. We're dealing with the very things he warned against and actually fought to prevent. And now we're seeing something similar happening in the United States. After they get rid of Donald Trump as president, the intelligence agencies have taken control of the narrative and taken control of social media and free speech and everything else. Mike, what's the threat here? How do we deal with it?
Well, the threat is two ways. There's the offensive threat by the bad elements, the ones who have weaponized the government against the public, the ones who have abused the authority of the FBI and the CIA, which conservatives generally were quite supportive of over the years. That's the offensive danger that we have. But there's a defensive danger too. So if we really look at this objectively, Donald Trump kept the deep state, as he called it, intact. He didn't do anything against it. He appointed the CIA to run itself with Gina Haspel. He appointed the FBI to run itself with Christopher Wray. He kept the whole diversity brainwashing program going on within both agencies. So it's not like if our friends take the government that things are going to change.
Yeah, well, that's frightening. What does that mean for us, though? I mean, I hear these words like misinformation, disinformation, malinformation, and you got to stop this. What does that all turn out to be?
Sure. Well, disinformation is really a Russian term. It's the English translation of the Russian term dezinformatia, which was a KGB term to define false information that was willfully planted into the general public for the purposes of deceiving a target audience. So that's disinformation. The FBI, by statute, has the obligation to combat foreign disinformation, not as a putting out its own narrative, but simply to detect it and expose it. Misinformation, by contrast, is just a misstatement of fact. It's a mistake. I said something wrong, something incorrect, or even something that was interpreted the wrong way. So it's not deliberate. It's not malicious. There's no bad intent behind misinformation. But what the FBI has done over the years is they have forgotten the difference between the two. Even though you'll see the Bureau define both terms accurately, in practice, as the Twitter files show, they were treating misinformation as a crime.
Well, sometimes it wasn't even misinformation.
As a counterintelligence issue, in fact, it's foreign spies behind misinformation, which isn't possible to do.
Yeah, and sometimes what they could label misinformation 6 months later turns out to be actually factual information. And we've seen so much in the COVID narrative. Now we're seeing Washington Post come out and acknowledge that death with COVID is not the same as death from COVID. And yet the narrative that they put out with anybody who died on a bike accident, if they had COVID, they counted as a COVID death. Well, that was misinformation actually from the narrative and not from the people.
Right. Or maybe it was disinformation. We don't know. But the fact that you have news organizations working with the central government to suppress different points of view, even from physicians in the case of COVID, where you need different points of view. They were repressing different points of view. They were deplatforming people. They were silencing people, and they were even depriving them of their livelihoods.
Well, and the scariest part to me is when you put that narrative out, you get groupthink, and groupthink always leads to totalitarianism, but it also leads to a destruction of individual liberty, creativity, and economic growth. When you have a totalitarian control, you have no real economic growth. So it destroys everything about the American way of life. That's why it's an economic warfare issue. If you silence opposition, then the world must be flat, and all bad humors cause all bad illness, and all these other wrong scientific narratives that we've had. But by allowing people to disagree with the narrative and to make their argument in a free speech fashion, it creates liberty, it creates opportunity and economic growth.